Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Neo Tokyo's official podcast, Interlinked, powered by Shrapnel. What's up, crypto gamers? I'm pleased to share I've got some updates on Shrapnel. First off, in regard to the litigation, they are open to a reasonable settlement, but they are determined to protect their rights in court and share that they have strong lawyers who will be there to protect them. That statement was shared on their Twitter. Now, on the game side, they have an event planned for the end of November where people are going to be able to dive back into the sacrifice zone for 7 days straight. This event will be aimed at celebrating the community in the last year that they had, and they're going to pack that week full of prizes. There's going to be digital rewards. There's even going to be physical rewards. I hear rumors about controllers and graphic cards, and there's going to be some updates to gameplay too. So they're going to have Revolver, they're going to have a new AR, and I even hear there's going to be a big announcement that week. So certainly stay tuned for more details. When we have a date to share, we will certainly share it. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playa3ull Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, playable.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlinked. I'm here today with my co-host, Jared. How are we doing today?
Doing great. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Anytime, brother. Hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And we are also joined here today by Neo, the CEO of WilderWorld. How are we doing today, Neo?
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. Stoked to have you. To get things rolling, would love to get an introduction in yourself, maybe cover some of your background, how you got into Web3, then we can dive into all things WilderWorld.
Cool. Yeah, so my background started off in software, so started developing software quite a while ago now, probably 25 years ago, actually. So I started when I was young. Started sort of writing BASIC and C++, and then got into entrepreneurship and started originally from Canada, started an early cloud company in 2004 that grew to that eventually raised capital for and sold. So it was like an early SaaS sort of cloud company, and built a number of interesting things there in terms of like early cloud-based X-ray technology, and it just kind of was, leading on multiple fronts at that time as browsers and cloud software was just starting to get popular. Really, it was about 7 years in building that before 2011 Apple came out with iCloud, and it was kind of a 7-year grind before that company really took off, and then moved to Silicon Valley after I exited that and spent about a decade there and built a small venture studio. And that we had kind of multiple parts to that company. We had a incubator where we'd sort of build and launch our own ideas, and actually all the projects we're working on now were actually incubated in San Francisco at our venture studio in starting around 2011, actually. So we're still working on all the same stuff. This is just sort of a giant continuation. And we also had we worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. So we'd actually help stand up anything from kind of like innovation departments, but also we would sort of fund and co-launch businesses, startups within sort of larger Fortune 500 companies. So our big customers ended up being everyone from Apple, Google, Nike, GE. We had about 25 Fortune 500 companies that we worked with. And we built a global network of, different types of hackers, innovators, designers, like really some of the top people in the world. We actually had we also had a private hotel in San Francisco. That was sort of this underground hotel, which was a pretty it's a pretty crazy story, but we ended up we had we had three sort of private residences in San Francisco, and we had the biggest mansion in San Francisco, and we turned that into this sort of like crazy innovation lab. And so that was kind of a sort of a wild era. And so there was just always a lot of interesting people, you know, in terms of this community that we built in San Francisco. So we sort of were interested early in crypto, and yeah, just kind of intrigued by it early on. I think I bought my first Bitcoin maybe around $200 or something like that. And shortly, yeah, I mean, I wrote a tweet the other day where I was like I've had to, every time crypto's gone up, I've had to like use it to fund payroll. So if I had to just probably sat and done nothing, you know, maybe it would be like less smart, but maybe have more money. But yeah, so started getting into crypto, and then yeah, really in 2015, just fully pivoted and went all in, and then started focusing on development. And there's sort of a whole crazy story there. It's really been like a 10-year journey in crypto, and we've sort of built several projects out of that. And WilderWorld is sort of been the main thing that's really taken off, that we started working on in 2019, and started working on the like brand and the community and the business before that. That was actually 2013. So I started that with my brother. So I was more on the blockchain sort of technology side. He's more on the art side. And there's sort of a whole backstory in terms of how Wilder came to be, but maybe I'll leave it there. And yeah, that's pretty much my background.
Yeah, appreciate it. We'll definitely circle back to the underground hotel story because I want to hear more about that.
Yeah.
But let's dive into WilderWorld. For those who might not be familiar, I've actually gotten the opportunity to play the racing game a number of times. We had a really fun NT Plays event with WilderWorld, but would love for the people who might not have the background in it, if you could give a nice overview on what it is.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, kind of our origins in crypto and Web3 were sort of relatively early, and the thing that really drew us into crypto was initially actually DAOs. So I started working on DAO protocols in around 2015, 2016, which was really there was really not that many people in the world working on those systems. But the sort of promise was, okay, well, you can have these sort of on-chain communities, you can have these on-chain collectives, companies, and you can kind of sort of disintermediate the need for a company altogether. And you can just have these sort of digital networks where you can create value, and value can be more efficiently sort of traded. And kind of, you can almost think of like the gig economy for like creative talent or creative capacity, sort of next generation of company. And then eventually, you're going to see these digital networks become more like nation states. And you've seen, I don't know if you followed any of like the Balaji stuff, where with network state, and that's now like a legitimate thing. People are looking at creating really, fully virtual sort of IRL/digital countries, on the blockchain. And so it's all happening. It's taken a long time to get to here, but our initial interest, like the origin story of Wilder, was that we were really interested in how these technologies, NFTs, DAOs, DeFi, blockchain, how that could impact the real world. And at that time, there was just so little interest in crypto. People were just not curious about it, basically, and it was just very, very difficult. So what we decided to do, we said, well, you know what, if you look at how the web evolved, it wasn't traditional companies that digitize themselves. It was native digital companies that were like founded in a garage. And so we tried to ask ourselves the question, was like, what's the native digital version of crypto? And we just couldn't help ourselves. Like, we're like, this obviously all ends up in virtual worlds. Like, that's where these things are fully going to take off, and there will be sort of tokenization of everything, and we will see all these sort of new primitives in society, but it's much easier to move bits than atoms, and therefore this stuff is likely to figure itself out in the virtual world. And we thought, okay, well, that's actually really cool. We could build this sort of giant simulation. We could take all these crazy ideas we have for the future, for society, and we could basically build them out in the simulation. And at the same time, we had already gotten into, one of my friends co-founded a company that was one of the first games that launched on PS5. And so we had been tracking like just the crazy, insane development of Unreal Engine. And so we actually started working on, I think we're probably like we're probably the first group that actually was building an Unreal Engine 5, because we were actually building an Unreal Engine 4 when we started WilderWorld. But essentially what it is, I mean, that's just some like backgrounds as to the origin. And I think the origin story is important, because I think a lot of people were like, they jumped on metaverse once it was hot, once Meta changed their name. And so that's just like a bit of the origin story. And I think that's important because a lot of people have just kind of like jumped on the hype of metaverse, or jumped in when NFTs were popular. And we were really seeing this like many years before, many years before it happened. So yeah, sorry, just cut it again. So basically we also just were seeing like the progression of photorealism, and so everything was looking like very low fidelity. And so what we decided to do is we were like, well, what if we could actually create like a full-scale city, a full-scale interactive environment, and build a city from the ground out, and not just approach it from the perspective of building a video game, but actually approach it from the perspective of like, if we were to actually build a city, how would you build a city? Who would you get involved? How would you think of the economy? How would you think of sort of bootstrapping that whole thing? How would the scale work, and all that different type of stuff? And we initially, so basically what it is like, I can get into a lot more detail. I'll try not to get in too many rabbit holes, but it's essentially a metaverse, or it's part of the metaverse, depending on how you define it. And I would say, I think this is opinion, but I think it's also like soon going to just be an empirical fact that it's the most ambitious virtual sort of highest fidelity city that has ever been built, or been attempted to be built. So it's about 13 and a half times the size of GTA. Similarly, it's it's like an order of magnitude larger than CyberPunk. And it really is this full-scale virtual city that you can go in and you can experience. And it is a metaverse, but it's much more designed like an open world game. So if you've played GTA, or if you've played CyberPunk, or really any open world game, you can do, it's intended that you can do as many things as possible, you can explore as many things as possible. And then we're using next gen technology for everything. So obviously pushing the limits of Unreal Engine 5 in terms of photorealism, in terms of just like a lot of the artists that we've brought on are amazing. So we wanted to work with a lot of the best people in the world. So we're about 120 people right now, but we have people that have worked on everything from Dune to Matrix, Blade Runner, Avengers, GTA, a lot of the iPhone. The team we've built this really crazy multidisciplinary team of everyone from artists, architects, developers, blockchain people, AI people. And then we're using next gen technology for pretty much every aspect of it. So we're using a lot of procedural technology and AI to actually build the world. And we were very early in adopting a lot of those technologies. So we have like a huge advantage in terms of like our process of actually how we're building the world. And then all the agents, all the NPCs are AIs natively. Everything is an NFT. Everything is maximally on chain. Businesses and collectives are DAOs basically, and everything is an NFT that is ownable. There's sort of whole digital economy in terms of resources and things like that. So our main principle has been realism, and not just like how do we create the metaverse, or how do we create a Web3 game that's AAA, but how do we actually create this sort of full scale simulation utilizing all these technologies? And yeah, we've brought in like, we've done between revenue and token that we've brought in about 60 to 70 million dollars. So we're, well funded, and we've been pretty much just uncompromisingly building this thing since, a lot of the underlying protocols, as I mentioned, starting in 2015. So all of that stuff's underneath the hood. And then the actual world development started in 2019 effectively, and then really started to ramp up in 2021. And it's really now starting to come to fruition. You've seen the racing game, obviously. That was really just meant to release as a test to show people what's possible. But in the open world, which is going to be launching next year, it's third-person shooter, first-person shooter, questing, full exploration, traversal via crafts, racing. There's just a really mining. There's just like this massive array of things that you can do, and it's the scale of it and the look of it and everything is just, yeah, I think it's really on another level. And I can kind of tell you how we've done that, but that's been a lot of the technology that we've invested in, essentially, is figuring out how to make it massive scale, but how to make it look really good. Usually those things are hard to achieve together.
Yeah, absolutely. To catch everybody up just on the some of the dev work that's been going on lately and some of the releases, you guys are going to be dropping a shooter, correct, in between the racer and the open world, or
We're
open up the shooting segment, maybe is the better way to frame
Yeah,
it.
yeah. One challenge we've had is that because we've started to release like modules or pieces of the game, people can think, oh, it's a shooter, oh, it's a this. And I know there is a lot of different blockchain projects that they're working on like building multiple games in parallel. And that's definitely not what we're doing. We're building one single world, one single universe, and then we're turning on these different game modes. But the shooter is basically ready. We just showed that at Tokyo Game Show. It was, extremely well received. It's a third person shooter and a first person shooter, so you can kind of switch back and forth, and it's heavily inspired by kind of if Halo and sort of like early FPSs like Quake, and or games like Crisis. So it's pretty cool, and that will all go live with the open world. Or we're launching something called Super Early Access, and that'll open the open world, and that'll be like a number of significant updates to racing, as well as being able to race in the entire world and create your own races, and then also different missions and FPS, and and then like more classic metaverse stuff like owning your own apartment and creating a store and all of those types of things, but set in a more let's call it desirable or interesting world.
Awesome. I have I sort of have like 1,000 questions after hearing all
Yeah,
that.
I'm wondering, like, it's very easy to go down rabbit holes. So
It's really exciting.
if you guys want to cut me off at any point if I'm going too
No,
much
no,
on a specific topic.
I love hearing about it. I wanted to talk about. I know you have a 120 person team, and you said you had a bunch of people. Now, are those some people that are from film as well as video games? And how do you find integrating those sort of different worlds? And what's your role in sort of keeping all those all those different individuals and sort of really all those different types of people focused on the one vision that you have and that WilderWorld has, and what is that like with all those different personalities and teams coming together? I always find that super interesting.
Yeah, so that has been a challenge, but it's also been kind of like my career and like our core team. I think we've always like the nature of kind of who we are and the stuff that we've built in the past is very like multidisciplinary in nature, because I really do think it is when you bring together like this fusion of different skills and different perspectives. But yeah, we have people that have worked on some of my favorite films and some of the biggest films ever, and as well as games, as well as architecture. So we have a number of professional architects on the team. And even those professional architects, like one of the core team members, like they were designing shoes for LeBron at Nike in this division called NXT, which is the most elite division inside of Nike, where they're doing supply chain, they're doing design, they're sort of like innovating on a lot of the next like gen footwear and stuff like that. So those guys they're architects, they're also very smart programmers, they're also artists, and they understand game engine, and they understand like Houdini, which is a software that we use. So even within specific disciplines, people generally have multiple skills. And then we also have people from Silicon Valley and, more like startup culture, but also, we have a guy that our main sort of like head of production worked on supply chain at for the iPhone. So, logistics and coordination. And so in some cases, we've brought in traditional people from the gaming industry, but in other cases, a lot of things about the gaming industry is like it runs very, very slow, and it's very antiquated in terms of how games are built. And so we approached it from more of like a Silicon Valley perspective. And then we have a lot of blockchain folks. We have a lot of people like Ethereum, more like early Ethereum type people, but we also have, people who've been in the Solana ecosystem who, develop code in Rust and understand the Solana ecosystem really well. So there's like a really interesting mix of blockchain developers. We're building a lot of protocols. We've built 5 core protocols so far, and then we're building a lot of the tech underneath the hood. And then we also have some different AI folks. Most of the company, very few people that are not technically focused or artists or designers, basically. And then just to kind of like answer your earlier question, is getting all these people to work together. I mean, initially it was quite hard. And I think there is the cross discipline. So creating what we're attempting to do. And I think people probably don't really understand what we've been doing. And, they see like the racing game, or they see whatever, but to us that is just like a few percent of what it is. And what we're going to be showing by the end of this year and what we're going to be shipping next year, it's really mind-blowing. Like it's mind-blowing, not just for Web3, like it's just mind-blowing for gaming. It's mind-blowing for just where we're sort of at in the technology arc, because the metaverse is the convergence of so many different types of technologies. But in terms of working together, I mean, we probably got close to 200 people in terms of how big the company got. And that became really difficult in terms of just the size of it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Dunbar scales, like past 150, things get a lot more sort of complex. And we, as creatives, like we wanted to keep things relatively flat. So keep kind of like scaling down, getting under that 150 number, making sure that we use a lot of procedural technology and AI technology, and then really getting clear on process. Like that was a huge thing. Like the architects wanted to build it like it was a real building. The game developers wanted to build it like it was a game, like a traditional game. The more startup people wanted to build it more like, lean startup approach. So there was all these sort of different approaches, and ultimately we just kind of scaled things down, and the people that were most adaptive and most capable of adjusting their process were the ones that we were able to kind of really start to make a lot of progress with. And now we have this like insane process in terms of, how we go from idea to something shipped in the game. And it's a process that we learned from basically trial and error, still drawing on a lot of people's experience from different industries. But as I mentioned, we're building the game in a completely different way. Like if you look at GTA, there's 2,000 people that work on GTA. So whatever, our team is 5% the size. But in games like GTA or CyberPunk, still everything is pretty much hand placed. So it's like best way to think of how games are built is like miniature figurines and people placing and programming those figurines and this sort of Lucidian space effectively. And what we did was we still have artists that are sort of the driving force and that are in charge of everything, but they basically have these like insane systems and these insane algorithms behind them I mean, AI is a very broad term, so I don't like to use it, but it's basically, you know, procedural AI, and the artists work with those systems, and like we'll build a system around a particular artist or around a particular idea. It could be roads, it could be buildings, it could be characters, it could be anything. And then we effectively program the world, and we build the world from the ground up programmatically. And then that enables us to iterate very, very quickly, but it also enables us to achieve all this other stuff in terms of scale and fidelity and graphics, because we can just pack a lot more on the GPU, which I can kind of get into more a little bit in just terms of like some of the technical problems that we've solved to actually build this mass scale world. But that's basically it. And it is a cast of characters as well. It is like, we're the Wilders, so people are pretty somewhat a little bit, you have to be kind of a little bit crazy to come, leave a legit company and come work in this crypto craziness and work on this, in metaverse as well, which has just been kind of like not the most popular thing. So it is just a crazy talented group of people that we put together.
Now a word from our sponsors.
What's up, crypto gamers? Shout out to our sponsor, Myria. Myria is revolutionizing Ethereum-based gaming with its powerful L2 scaling solution. Think zero gas fees, instant transactions, free NFT minting, and more. Myria offers a suite of tools that are tailor-built for game development, including game-specific SDKs, a spec'd-out marketplace, Web3 spiked leaderboards, new AI super tools, and more. All this fueled by a fleet of player-run nodes that are a breeze to operate and pump out daily rewards for supporting the ecosystem. Plus, check out Meta Rush, the Battle Royale obstacle runner by Myria Studios, dropping very, very soon.
Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
Yeah, the cultural fun of just everyone who's like willing to work in the Wild West, like, even the blacksmith in one of these old sort of cowboy towns, like had to have some wild side to him if he was living out in, living out in the Wild West with all the craziness going on. And I think crypto is very similar in that aspect. I'd love to get into a little bit more about like what's going to make Wild World special just from like an open world standpoint. Obviously, you mentioned GTA, you mentioned like CyberPunk, like gamers that are going to be coming into the open world of Wilder World. Like, what are some of those like pushing the boundaries just on the open world space that they're going to be excited about?
Yeah, well, so number one is the scale. So I'll just kind of go through what I think is interesting about it. But number one is the scale. So there is really something to a lot of these games, and even now, if I go from like Wilder World and I go into say Cyberpunk, the scale of Cyberpunk, it almost feels like a toy city compared to the city that we built. And so the first thing that we really spent a lot of time, we had, I think at the height, we had 7 or 8 architects full time. And we had architects from not just anywhere, we had architects from Zaha Hadid, which is one of the top architecture firms in the world. And we really wanted to build the city in a way that was futuristic, but realistic. The word that we had was protopia. So you want kind of like a believable future that is positive, but not like a sort of unbelievable utopia. And you also don't want like dystopia. So kind of a believable, positive future that is set in the sci-fi universe. Blade Runner, sort of Matrix, Blade Runner, 2 of my favorite movies. So we wanted to go and get people that had actually worked on those films and actually knew how to make the cities look like, getting a city to actually look. Most of the stuff you see when you see like a city in a video game, it's like painted in the background. Like it doesn't actually exist. And there's very interesting camera tricks and things they do with it to actually make that city. But when you actually start building the city from the ground up, where you want to have all the spaces explorable and you want to be able to traverse everywhere in that world, it gets really tricky to make it look like this mass scale futuristic city, basically. So I think I mentioned this a little bit, but we took all of the open source data, street data. We did a partnership with the city of Miami, and we used that as our basically bedrock in terms of taking all that data in and helping us generate the city. And then we, built this sort of super sci-fi city, but using a lot of things, like even just getting road sizes right and door sizes right, and the scale, like being able to look up in the scale. Like if you think of Blade Runner, when that opening shot, it's all about establishing that you're in this futuristic world that is like insane, right? Like it's just so mass scale. And that's what's, I think, kind of the defining, it's one of the main defining ideas of sci-fi. And I think that's also something that where we're a lot different than GTA is very much set in this reality. It's set in what is the current culture, and it's very much like trying to recreate or sort of make fun of sort of modern culture, and they do that extremely well. And what we wanted to do was have a game like GTA, but that is much more like kind of dramatic, serious, more like Dune, Star Wars, Matrix, like more sort of sci-fi, but infuse it with like the gameplay of something like GTA. So I think that's number one, is really establishing like the art and the scale of the city, and getting in there and feeling like when you go in there, having a feeling of like I'm in an actual place. I'm not just in a video game. I'm actually in a different place. We say, we say WilderWorld's an alternative dimension of reality. So how do we make it actually feel, both in terms of the lore and the look and how the economy works and all that sort of stuff, where people actually start to, imagine this as an actual alternative space that they can be in. The next thing we tried to do was really make sure that the underlying gameplay is as good as what you'd expect in a game like a modern AAA game. So not most games, even like say Cyberpunk and GTA, the driving really sucks. The shooting mechanics really suck. And what the trade-off those groups basically make is they say, well, we're going to build this mass scale open world. We can't do everything great. So let's just, but the sum is greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So it works. And like, if you actually go in, you play with the GTA shooting mechanics, or you play with the driving, and you just try to evaluate it just on the basis of that, and you forget that you're in this like super fun open world, you realize just how bad it is. And so we really have tried to bring in experts for each of those different game genres. So for racing, for instance, we brought in one of the original creators of a game called Assetto Corsa, and Assetto Corsa is the leading sim racing game in the world. So Aris, he runs our Wheels industry and team, and he's like a complete legend in not just like racing games, but like sim racing, which is the hardest type of racing games to build. And so we really wanted to have as realistic physics as possible in terms of the actual racing game. It's like, hey, make this as good as Forza, make this as good as Assetto Corsa, make the racing physics as real as possible. And similarly, we're doing the same thing on the shooter as well. Like, let's not just have this be, a lot of these Web3 games are just skinning something called Lyra. I don't know if you guys know about this. they like, I don't know how many Web3 projects I've seen. They literally just skin Lyra. But building a proper like first person, third person shooter is actually really hard to get everything right. But just kind of going for it and being uncompromising in that. And so we've really looked at it from the perspective of like, you have to build all these different pieces, and these pieces take years and years and years to build. But once all these pieces come together, if we can build them all independently, it's going to be pretty amazing. And that's kind of stage where we're at right now, is like seeing all of those pieces come together. The one area where we're kind of, that will need a lot of work after we sort of launch super early access is content, missions, all this type of stuff. But that stuff is more like you can build it, or you can build it if you have all the underlying systems. It's not so hard to do that stuff. What's hard is getting the actual, in gaming it's called the juice, right? It's like when you go in there and you play and it feels good, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. In GTA, it's going in and running around and stealing some cars and creating as much chaos as you can. And that's what most people do in that game, right? So it's getting all those underlying mechanics right. And then once you have that, the way we really see it shifting is opening all those tools to creators. And so not just having a linear narrative and a linear set of missions and a linear story, and linear assets and all that sort of stuff, but taking all the tools that we're building and basically turning them into consumer products, like turning the way we build, taking each of those products, turning them into actual products people can use and people can monetize, and then having people create missions, having people create stories, having people create their own industries, and so on and so forth. And so that's pretty much where we're going to be next year, is really starting to shift into that, where just like there was no podcasting, there was no influencers, there was no, any of this stuff before social media. We think there's just going to be like this whole new class of creator, which is kind of like your indie game designer, experience curator, person that wants to, do that stuff. And, that will really be where I think it gets really, really interesting. Obviously we're going to have like lots of missions and stuff in there that we're creating, but I'm much more excited to see kind of what the community does with it by opening up all the tools.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested to see how like having the NPCs set up. I'm assuming when you said AI, they're like hooked up to like large language models, and how that's going to change sort of like UGC and like the ability for the community to go in and like find interesting instances of these NPCs and like sort of shape them into missions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Every yeah, it's actually really cool. Like everything is either tied into the blockchain or tied into AI in some significant way. And if you think of existing games, that's just not the case. I mean, the AI is very primitive in existing games. You can't own anything in existing games. Now, really what we're seeing with the whole AI agents meta is the convergence of AI and blockchain. And so I really think that convergence meets in the metaverse, because at the end of the day, like, okay, wow, I have this, my AI bot has a wallet now and it's tweeting, but like, what else can it do, right? So I think having these interactable agents, which are actual characters that actually have memory, that you can actually have go do things, um, gets extremely interesting. And that's basically it. Like, we have every single AI, every single NPC in the world needs to have its own memory, needs to be able to update and adapt and learn, needs to be able to have skills, needs to be able to be trained, needs to be able to do things, needs to be able to have its own economic value. So I do think there is a chance that the game will become much more like, meta, where you can go in there and you can be in the experience of the first person shooter, but you can also be playing at a much higher level and coordinating resources and things like that via agents.
Jared, I saw you go to unmute earlier. Did you have a question on top of mind?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go a little bit further in, and you had kind of talked about, people coming in and having, creator content. How deep are people going to be able to go? I know you said sort of set up companies, and how deep are you going to let people go to come in and sort of set up really their own individual economy within the larger system of the game? And what does that look like as it sort of progresses, and people start, putting time and creative energy into it? I'm really excited to see sort of, what WilderWorld's vision of that is.
Yeah, so there's quite a few problems you need to solve in order to actually do this. A lot of people talk about this, they kind of hand wave it, and they're like, oh, like, they just, the way the metaverse has talked, like, I think the metaverse, the reason nobody takes it seriously is just because how people have talked about it, and then what the actual reality was in terms of what was shipped. And I think a lot of the narrative has been, oh, you're gonna like magically be able to just be your avatar, and you're gonna jump from this world to this world to this world, and you're gonna be able to create whatever you want. And it's just been a lot of people just selling kind of hot air. But there's really some kind of like fundamental problems that need to be, so to answer your question, like, to increase the level of what people can create, there's some really fundamental problems that need to be solved. And if those problems aren't solved, that's not really possible. So the first thing that we So the answer is basically as deep as possible, but I think the context that's important is like you actually need to be able to solve these specific problems. So the first problem is economy. So like the real trick of game development, which a lot of people don't understand, if you go back and you read there's a great book on the creator of Doom, John Carmack, who later ran Oculus at Facebook. And just like back in those days, like if you had to be a game developer, you pretty much needed to be like a full gigabrain because your whole job was just trying to like make the thing as efficient as possible. And in recent times, like games have become incredibly bloated. But basically game companies today, they can't even manage the resources on the computer for the people that are working in the company, let alone letting the internet come and just start building all this stuff in this virtual environment. It's very, very different than social media or a web 2 company or a cloud company or whatever the case may be, because you have this finite amount of space, which is mostly on your GPU, which is loading things in, and that's determining, okay, well, what are the graphics going to look like? How much stuff can you load in and can you see on the screen at one time? And the more kind of different objects there are, the harder the computer has to work. And you can make sort of the whole world break and crash very, very quickly. So what you actually need is something like reality. Like if you think of reality is built with atoms, and then there's molecules, and there's sort of this whole hierarchical structure in terms of how objects are created in the real world. And you basically need to do that within the game environment. And you need to then tie that into economy, because one of the things with NFTs, for instance, that the novel property of crypto is that you can create digital scarcity, basically. And I mean, that's basically what Bitcoin did, is they took digital value and they were able to basically enforce it with scarcity and immutability with basically like no trusted intermediary. And that's really it. But once you can start to create like 10 NFT contracts, 100 NFT contracts, like anybody can launch an NFT, anybody can launch a token, you're pretty much just completely lost, and everything just goes down to zero because of inflation. So if we create a virtual world and all of a sudden anybody can launch whatever they want in that virtual world, well, like what is the value of one sneaker versus the other? What is the value of one car versus the other, right? If somebody can just come in and create that for next to nothing. So what you actually need is you need a resource economy, and you need a way to constrain. It's kind of like Ethereum. How do they manage block space? They manage it with gas. And if lots of people want block space, gas goes up. So you need something similar for the metaverse, basically, where people need to purchase the raw materials that actually build out, that actually every single object is made of these raw materials. And there's a market price for those raw materials, and there's an actual price of actually creating things. And when you do create a car, it has to be made up of certain base components, because if every car is not sharing those resources in terms of how it's constructed, if you just let everybody construct things in whatever way they want, you basically lose on scalability very, very quickly. So we've essentially been building this both economic framework, but also in how we've actually built the game, that allows the very efficient sort of reuse of these underlying components or these underlying modules. And then we have our team, instead of artists sort of manually hand doing everything, we have our team basically use those procedural systems. And then basically we're going to open up those procedural systems. And then there would be a process, kind of like the App Store. Like, so let's say anybody would be able to build a building, and you can have tons of variety in terms of what that building is, or you can have tons of variety in terms of what your apartment looks like, or you have tons of variety in terms of what your store looks like. But if you want to introduce something that's like fundamentally new, like let's say like a new type of building panel or something like that that's made out of new materials, there would be a particular process that needs to happen for that. But already I think we're talking more than you can do in any existing game. I mean, that's pretty much the starting point. But in the end, you really want it to be like the internet. You really want people to be able to go in there and have a lot of creative freedom. But you also don't want the city to just look like absolute garbage, right? Like if you're bringing people in that have worked on Dune, and some of these top things, like, no, there needs to be um, aesthetic guidelines. There needs to be ways in which like that city is actually amazing, because at the end of the day, that's what people want. Like they want to go into something that is incredible. And if you just let anybody do whatever they want, it's going to be not very good. So part of that's enforced by rules, but the other part of it is having a DAO in the city, having city council, having building codes, having all these types of things. So just a lot of things that you see emerge in the real world. We have all of that. Like all that data is on chain, all of the building codes, all of the rules, all that stuff's on chain, but it's all run by a DAO. And so in theory, people could get together, landowners could get together, and they could fundamentally shift structural parts of the game, where there's no limits. But so yeah, I mean, this is like one of the things I'm really passionate about, because it was one of the hardest problems to actually solve in terms of actually making the city, like usually when you make something large scale like Minecraft or whatever, you lose on fidelity and you end up with like a more pixelated world. And so a lot of the stuff we're seeing in Unreal Engine 5, that's amazing. It's amazing, but like it's very hard to actually have that scale. And so that's been a lot of our secret sauce, is basically figuring out how do you connect economy with the actual constraints of the GPU, with the actual creator economy, and how do you have all that stuff like come together basically in a way that will actually scale.
Well, Jared, I can see you're seeing dollar signs because you're going to be opening up a third legal firm that's going to focus on zoning and building codes.
I absolutely was thinking that, and that's kind of exciting where you can have like a third party come in and go up to the tribunal, whoever that is, and then the DAO, and say, look, here's what we want to do, and have it in the metaverse. That's super exciting.
Yeah, we're designing out, like we've designed all the primitives, like and it's not like we're thinking about this stuff now. It's like this is a lot of the stuff we were thinking about in 2015, 2016. So I think we're probably one of the only metaverse teams that started at much more of a fundamental level, looking at these as societal primitives. But yes, there will be a justice system. There will be, we already launched 7 DAOs that power the world basically. And that number will continue. Then those 7 DAOs are different industry DAOs. So like the Wheels DAO is different than the, Crafts DAO is different than and like these are kind of different. They're almost like industry associations basically that define the rules of that game. But that part of it, yeah, I mean, from a legal perspective, I'm sure you're kind of like fascinated by it, because it's really, modern society is kind of built off law, right? Like first math, then language, then law, right? So this is kind of that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting a little close to the top of the hour here. Want to be respectful of your time, but are there any topics that we didn't get a chance to dive into in regard to WilderWorld that you want to tackle before we wrap?
Yeah, no, not really. I think, yeah, I'd be curious what you guys are kind of think is most interesting. And then I'd also be curious, like, as it relates to kind of where we're at in the market and the current meta and metaverse, potentially coming back as sort of like a major, we're starting to see like early signs of that. But yeah, maybe just would love to hear from you guys, like what you think is most interesting, and then maybe kind of just like where we're at in this from your perspective. Obviously, I have a very like inside perspective and I'm biased. Would be curious to think of like where we're at on that arc, basically.
Yeah, I mean, to tackle first, the most exciting part to me is it's probably the user generated content, like around like missions, like the ability to sort of go beyond like the current level that we're at in UGC, which, I got to watch a lot of it because I'm both an RTS player, Total War, where there's been a huge modding community, as well as like, my first taste of like modding was, if you can call it that, was, Forge and Halo, and playing all of these, crazy little like ninja maps that people would create, or, Griffball and such. So really excited to see that get taken to the next level. Probably also very pumped on, LLMs being hooked up to NPCs. Find that super exciting. I mean, that's something that, the market's starting to become a little bit inundated of, but I think it's one of those things that when people actually get like a tech demo of it and it goes beyond just like, sort of that canned LLMs, NPCs, and actually get to see these new conversations that are being had and this new level of like, I hate intimacy sounds a little weird, but I guess it's accurate of like having a closer relationship with these NPCs. Like, I'm brought back to my Harvest Moon days that I was playing on the GameCube and how, so emotionally invested in some of these little like digital relationships with these, completely scripted, very basic NPCs. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops. As far as the arc of like development, where we are in the cycle and such. I mean, just from what I've been seeing from my conversations, like we went from a holding pattern of investing and releasing content where like everybody was like a little gun shy in December and November. I always like imagine like all the penguins on the cliff in like Antarctica and like the second one goes, everybody wants to go, but no one wants to be first. Now it seems like people are like sort of beating down Launchpad's doors to be like, hey, we're trying to launch, we're trying to launch, we're trying to launch. I think January is going to be crazy stacked. And, as much as like the tech keeps on chugging no matter what, like it is a very entertainment, speculation driven space. So I think there's a lot of projects that have some pizzazz that they've been keeping in the back pocket and some gunpowder, and that we're going to see sort of a real showcase of what everyone's been working on, for the last like couple years when things were a bit more quiet. So very, very excited for that overall.
Yeah, and I'll go in and kind of echo a lot of what Nick said, but I think as far as the metaverse in itself, I think at this point it's sort of like a lot of Web3 games. It's like put up or shut up, right? At this point, to have the metaverse and have lots of interest built in it, we need to have like WilderWorld come out, people go in and see it and realize, okay, wow, yeah, like some of the things that, say 4 years ago when the metaverse kicked off, yeah, things just weren't ready, right? The tech wasn't available, but now we've come such a long way. Once we have that sort of title that comes out and says, here's what you can do, here's what the availability is to go have fun in it. And I think that is really the key. So I'm most excited for that to come out, to be able to have sort of another genre to go into and play. And this is almost in a way sort of a Sims, because you can do a lot of real world things into it. I mean, having building codes to me screams Sims, just because it's very close to reality. But you know, I think that people will be able to go in and have the kind of fun that you also have shooter style stealing, like all those things are there. And I think that's really an important concept to have in a game that has the ability to sort of be more real world than others. And to me, that's that's super exciting. And I'm excited to see how not just WilderWorld, but lots of our other games, some of who have started maybe recently in this bull, and others who have started last bull. So they, created, a way to survive the bear market, and now they're coming out of hibernation, and hopefully have been building for that entire time, and seeing the fruits of their labor, and how how they're going to sort of weave through the maze of the bull market and how to position themselves. And like Nick was saying, everyone's like beating down the doors because it's like, well, now it's time. This is a great time, obviously, for token valuations, coming up soon, and I'm interested for that. So yeah, the whole thing's in general, I think this next few months are going to be really, really busy and really exciting. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's definitely cool. I totally agree with you that it's like a put up or shut up moment. And I'm really looking forward to that, because I feel like we've put in the work, and there's just been as a project in crypto, and as a project in crypto metaverse, it's just like there's just been so much nonsense and ridiculousness, and I just kind of I want people to see what we've done, and just to kind of just be like, do the mic drop and be like, hey, like this is, because I think it's been years of, we have a lot of loyal supporters and people who follow the project very, very closely, but people on more the outside, I could imagine them looking at something like WilderWorld and being like, this just sounds like a complete pipe dream. Which is totally fine. And then the whole industry is, specifically metaverse, it has been so underwhelming. So I am really excited to show what we've been working on, and we're going to, by the end of this year. So right now the target is December 21st, but we're launching a pretty much like the first look at the open world. And it's a recording of gameplay, and it'll be between 12 and 20 minutes kind of thing. And it is the actual world. Like the stuff, a lot of the stuff we've shared before have either been, more from the racing side, or it's been, prototypes or different types of, different pieces of the world. But this is actually sharing something that we're like ready to share with the world, basically, where we'll share pretty much the whole thing, and you'll get to experience all the stuff that I'm talking about. You'll be able to see it, just like if, before a game releases, and you can watch a mission playthrough or whatever, and you can get a real sense of like where the game's actually at. And then we're going to open up super early access in early 2021. So targeting before the end of Q1 right now. And then the game will go into, multiple years of early access, but we do think it's good enough where, we can start to build a real player base early next year. So it is pretty exciting. Yeah. And you're right about the technology arc. Like the tech just hasn't been there. One of the smart decisions that I think we made is there was kind of two ways you could go at metaverse in 2021. You could say, oh, the tech's not there, so I'm going to build like a pixelated, like whatever. I'm going to build something very low fidelity and not very interesting, but it's quote unquote metaverse. And in our particular case, we just saw like how fast AI was evolving, how fast procedural technology was evolving, photorealistic rendering. It's all an exponential curve, right? So if you can't do it today, like there's a good chance you're going to be able to do it in 18 months or, 3 years or whatever the case may be. And so that is exactly how we built, where certain problems we didn't know how we were going to solve, but we're like, the tech is basically going to get there. So let's just like lean into the curve. And it feels now that the wind is kind of like, is soon going to be at our back. And I think a lot of people think metaverse is, oh, it's never going to come, or it's going to come whenever. And I think we have an opportunity to show people pretty quickly, like within the next 90 days. And if we're full of shit, people are going to find out not in 5 years. They're going to find out in 60, 90 days. But I think I feel very confident that when we launch this, it's good. People are going to be like, holy shit. So really looking forward to that, given how challenging it's been with the bears and metaverse and all this type of stuff, like really planting a flag. So that that's basically it. The whole team's just cranking right now to get that ready, but you guys will be able to see it in what is today? Yeah, within like 30 days.
Oh, I'm stoked. I can't wait, to see it and then get my hands on it and be able to play. We're really in like, I think back to like 2021 when I was doing a bunch of like research for the NT research team. You used to be able to play pretty much all of the Web3 games in a weekend. So to now be at the stage where we're at and where we're approaching is super, super exciting. But Neo, first off, want to really thank you for coming on to the podcast. You're definitely welcome to come back anytime. Maybe in Q1, we'll do a deep dive around opening opening up WilderWorld to the public and getting to talk about that, which will be super fun.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you guys having me on, and yeah, I'm excited. Let's definitely do a deep dive after the next version of the game launches, and you guys can play it. Maybe we get you early access. We're going to start opening it up to key people, partners, influencers, key community members, all that sort of stuff, and really early in the new year. So yeah, we'll get it in your guys' hands, and love to get your guys' feedback on it.
Oh, much appreciated. And maybe we'll do the next pod inside WilderWorld. We've been talking about how as these games develop, it'd be fun, to
Oh
play
yeah,
with the team in the game and be able to talk about it, I think is the
we
next
can.
level for podcasting.
Yeah, we can totally do that. We have the full facial rigging mapping. We can do the real time mapping. We've already done some content like that. So yeah, we can definitely do the Neo Tokyo studio in there.
Fuck yeah, that'd be great. Jared, as always, very grateful to be co-hosting with you coming in during the holiday weekend. Much appreciated, brother.
Thank you, Neo, for being here. It was an absolute pleasure. Nick, always a pleasure. I'm excited. I'm really excited. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, thanks guys. Have a great day. Take care.
Yeah, you too. And big thank you, of course, to the audience. Thanks for joining us today. This has been Neo Tokyo's official podcast, Interlinked, and we will be back next week with another episode. Take care, y'all.